Hello, everybody. Welcome to Thursday. If it's Thursday, that means it's webinar time. So I am Chris Hines, and I am former commissioner and Strata advisor with Hines. With me, as always, Frank Higginson, partner.
Hello,
Hines.
everyone.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to this lovely Thursday. And today, something a bit different. So we're going to try out the Ask Anybody Corporate Question You Like webinar. And judging by the questions we've got already, people are taking that one very literally, which is good. Fair to say, Frank and I have done pretty much no preparation for this. What can you do, Frank? What sort of preparation can you do?
I'd say it's probably years of doing this together when you were commissioner at the end of sessions where we opened the floor to Q&A. Yep. The difference this time is we can probably control a little bit more about what we answer and ignore some of the rants. And probably the one caveat I will put on this, ladies and gentlemen, as you would expect, that this is all commentary. It's not legal advice. If you want to rely on it, you need to get something in writing from us or someone else. But obviously there'll be a bucket load of guidance. So don't take this as gospel unless we put it in writing and charge for it, of course. But let's start where we start and finish where we finish. These
are observations based on experience, aren't they, Frank?
Yep.
Very much so. A couple of other ground rules, everybody. Don't want to make it too formal, but a couple of ground rules. Let's just keep it to one question at a time. Please try and avoid multi-part questions. Apart from anything else, it's just confusing for Frank and I.
We are simple men.
Here we are. Let's also avoid statements. This is questions, not statements. And if you happen to be watching us from somewhere other than Queensland, by all means ask the question. We probably won't be able to comment on other states' legislation. We can comment generally though, and that actually might be a help in a lot of situations, I would expect. We will begin, Frank, with a couple of the questions posed to us before. So I'm just about to put the first one up. He says, waiting for it to appear. This is actually a question about new legislation that kicks in on the 1st of March. So the new legislation, and I will paraphrase these questions, everyone, just so that we can get through them. Talking about votes outside of committee meetings, does a returned written abstain vote actively indicate a lack of agreement concerning a motion? The new provision, section 69, talks about, and I will tell you exactly when I bring it up, the motion is decided if the majority of all members entitled to vote on the motion agree, or 1/2 or more of the members do not agree. So, in other words, Frank, I think that means there's no provision to consider abstain. It's either agree, don't agree.
No, and in effect, I suppose if you abstain, you're disagreeing. Because you've got to be passed by a majority. So a committee of 7, 4 votes in favour means it's passed. 3 votes in favour with 4 abstentions means it's lost.
Thank you, Frank. Next question put to us beforehand. So that one came from Stephen, and Stephen, I know that you regularly tune in, so thanks for doing that. This next one comes from Linda, who I know is also a regular. Linda, thank you for tuning in. And Linda's question, and Linda gave a bit of background about it, but effectively it boils down to, and again, waiting for it to appear, what redress do body corporates have against contractors who damage common property or who don't complete work in line with body corporate standards? And Linda describes a situation where they had contractors on site. There's been some damage to common property. And the follow-up question, I suppose, is how do we educate contractors they need to seek body corporate approval for work on common ground? Frank, do you want to kick that one off?
Yeah, absolutely. So starting point, and this is something that's very loose out there, is the terms of the contractor's engagement should dictate the standards to which they're going to complete their work. So it is extraordinary the amount of times that we see we're giving advice to bodies corporates after the event where the only contract to actually do the work, which was approved at general meeting, was a quote. So it's like anything. You need to have an engagement that says what you're going to do, what you're going to get paid for it. And I suppose in response to this question, the standards to which you are going to perform that work. And I suppose you'd add on to that, subject to the quantum of the work and what it is, warranties around the performance of it. We're talking about buildings, painting buildings, we're talking about building driveways, or whatever it might be. You'd like to think that includes some form of warranty that it'll be fit for purpose and useful for a number of years. So that's point one. Point two, in terms of where do you go to the extent that the contractor doesn't do the work properly, you sue them. That's it. That's what courts are for. So ideally, you have a conversation with them first and you engage with them about rectification of their work. If they're a QBCC licensed contractor, there might be some rights pursuant to the QBCC. But other than that, that's a normal piece of commercial litigation in the sense of we paid you to do X job. When you did that, you damaged the walls by bringing stuff in or whatever. That's a civil claim, the same as it would be against anyone else, not the Commissioner's office, a civil claim in whatever the appropriate court might be.
Yep. Agreed on all points. We might take one of the questions that just come in live from Rob. Rob asks, can I install solar panels on my 2-story strata unit, one of 24 units, single corrugated roof? Short answer is yes, isn't it, Frank? But there's a longer answer that goes behind that.
There is. So, there you go. I've refreshed and now I see all the questions. Yes, so if you want to Google something, that's called Ban the Banners. And what that was, crikey, that might still be 10 years old now, in the context of not allowing third parties to prevent, I suppose, energy efficient measures being installed in buildings. So short version is you'll be able to get there. Longer version, as Chris was saying, is you still shouldn't just stick that up. You should do that with the approval of your committee in accordance with your bylaws. And then it's not going to probably be within the scope of the committee to say no outright, but there may be some reasonable conditions that can be imposed in relation to your installation, not the least of which is the times at which you might install it and clean it up afterwards and all those sorts of things.
Well said, Frank. Good one.
I'm guessing right, am I?
I think so. Let's take one that's been placed on Facebook just a little earlier today from Peter. Peter, thank you. Peter's question is, can a body corporate prevent a resident from using a smoker barbecue in the courtyard of a ground floor apartment? And then Peter goes on to say, assuming the answer is yes, how is that different from the body corporate claiming it is unable to stop a resident sitting in the courtyard and chain smoking day and night? Well, I'll kick that one off if you like, Frank, and then hand over to you. There is no difference because at the end of the day, what we're talking about here is a nuisance, potentially. Nuisance is nuisance, whether it's nuisance caused by cigarette smoke or nuisance caused by smoke coming from barbecue smoker. Now, having said that, there is a process to follow through to pursue a nuisance complaint and to enforce a bylaw. Frank, did you want to sort of add something there?
No, that's really it. So it's a question of what's unreasonable interference with someone else's use and enjoyment of their lot is really what it comes back to. So almost all of these arguments we have about amenity come back to that. And again, what I suppose for those of you that have watched these a bit, what the legislation prevents is unreasonable interference, which by definition means that what's allowed is reasonable interference. And of course, the lawyers make their money in the middle with arguing about what those things actually are.
That's right.
So,
yeah. And what I'd add to that, Peter, regardless of the vehicle, whether it's a barbecue, whether it's cigarettes, whether it's cigars, whether it's incense, what are some of the other ones?
Marijuana.
Yeah, that too. Whether it's any of those, the nuisance is the nuisance. It doesn't matter what I suppose what I'm trying to say is the vehicle isn't the issue. It's the nuisance or the interference caused by, in this case, it would be the smoke. It may be in some cases the smell, for that matter. There's smell and there's smoke. So that's the issue that you're needing to pursue. Next question, also posed online not so long ago. Anne, can the secretary, care of the body corporate manager, receive electronic votes ballots?
Really, Anne?
They cannot, Anne, for the next month. Can they, Frank?
Yep, they can. Yep, 1st of March they can. Up until now, in theory, they can't. although the shortcut that lots of people are using is having the secretary's office or the address of the secretary care of the body corporate manager. So if something's sent to the secretary, it goes back to the body corporate manager. So the reality is that we're probably not going to see an adjudication in the next 4 and a bit weeks as to whether that's actually valid or not. But that's what a lot of people are doing. But certainly come the 1st of March, material delivered to the secretary can be delivered to the body corporate manager. Section 222. So very Richie Benno.
Nice. Question from Mel. Mel, thank you. Can a lot owner change what they pay in fees, i.e. pay only for certain expenses in the common property? They don't want to pay for pool expenses they don't have access to. Interesting one.
Chris, we're going back almost 12 months because wasn't that number one COVID question?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, you don't, once you are a member, I'll answer it my way and then I'll hand over to Frank. Once you're a member of a body corporate, you don't get to pick and choose those things that you will contribute to, because the whole point of being in the body corporate is that you are contributing proportionately to expenses. So there it is. Frank?
End of story. It's like, it's sort of, in a sense, not paying your council rates because you don't use one of the bins. You know, I'm not going to bother recycling. I'm going to stick it all in the red top bin and that's it. So therefore I should get a discount. No, that's, you know, and it is a bit inflexible. Don't get me wrong. You know, the ability to change lot entitlements is zero effectively at the moment unless everyone agrees, and that's unlikely to happen because for every person who goes down in what they're paying, someone else has got to go up. So, you know, commercial interest means that won't happen. But other than that, they are very fixed. Once you sign on, you sign on. And there's no way out of it. So there's no sort of, and I suppose that's for facilities that are common. For facilities that might be private use, then what should happen, and quite often you go to townhouse estates, for example, you might have a block where you own 300 square metres of land. The front part of that land might be part common property and might be part yours. Because in a townhouse estate that is a standard format plan, you can actually own the land. And what sometimes happens is the body corporate might maintain that whole frontage. So in theory, what should happen is to the extent the body corporate's maintaining your private property, they should be recovering the cost of that from you. But that's a service to you as a private lot owner, as opposed to, for example, the sweeping of the roadways, which is a service to everyone and what the fixed entitlements and the fixed cost for the budgeting every year comes with. Yeah. So no, it's not optional.
That's right. That's right. If I could put that another way, Frank, let's just say you have moved into a high rise and it's got lifts, and then after a few months living in there, you decide that you want to get fit and you're going to use the stairs from now on rather than the lifts. You don't, you can't rock up to the body corporate and say, can you please just skythe off all of my lift expenses, please, because I'm not using that anymore. No, it doesn't work that way. No. Next question on that was posed to Facebook earlier from Jack. Body corporate can increase works anytime to ask manager not in agreement and ask to sign paper agreement for adding works. So what is the right to progress with extra work? So Jack, I think you're talking here about a caretaker who's got an agreement and then is apparently being asked to do extra responsibilities. Frank, over to you.
100%. No. So the essence of a caretaking agreement is this is what you're required to do. This is what you are paid to do it. We certainly, both Chris and I, get involved in lots of conversations around what caretaking duties actually extend to, because if you know a manager's being paid 100 grand and you've got a nebulous agreement that isn't quite as specific as it could be, then quite often there's arguments about interpretation of what certain clauses might be. But at a very macro level, if the agreement says you're required to do X, and specifically there's no argument that you're not required to do Y, if the body corporate wants you to do Y, then the body corporate and you need to come to an agreement about what you're going to charge for the performing Y. End of story. So you got X dollars to do X duties, and outside that, whether you provide additional services is up to you, and the cost you provide them is also up to you. So the important thing to remember with the management rights agreement, it's a contract. It's a binding agreement between two parties. So in that sense, if I agreed to buy Chris's house from him for 500 grand, I can't sign a contract and then turn around a week later and say, actually, mate, you know what? I'm going to take it off you for 450 now. It's not the way it works. It's a deal. So if you have got that deal, then any changes to that deal need the agreement of both parties. And that's particularly relevant with respect to duties outside the scope of the agreement. But like I said, a lot of the arguments we have are around what's included and excluded. But if that's black and white like that, very simple. No one can make you do anything more than what you want. Absolutely.
Thanks, Frank. Question from Anne, different Anne than before. Can you provide some detail around a record of motions? Not 100% sure what you mean on that one, Anne. Frank, do you have any idea?
I'll have a stab. So I suppose we spoke about votes outside committee last week. So for those of you that didn't catch that one, it's probably very relevant. And I think probably the thing that you learn something new every day in this job. It doesn't make much sense to me to have committee meetings having to confirm votes outside committee that have previously been decided, but a committee meeting must confirm motions that have been decided by votes outside committee between the committee meetings. And I'd say the record of motions is really probably, to me, then putting yourself in the shoes of a third party in terms of if you wanted to understand what's going on in that body corporate, what's the level of detail that should be in the individual motions that are recorded in the minutes. So a motion to send a letter to the owner of lot 32 on its own is meaningless. A motion to, yes, let's resolve to send a letter to the owner of lot 32 in relation to their keeping of a pet without the approval of the body corporate and requiring them to make an application for that is probably what should be there. There's my stab.
Fair enough. And if you're around and that wasn't what you were talking about, pop us a question online. Just one that's come in since we started just now from Sky. Sky, thanks for tuning in. Do you need body corporate approval to modify the garden area within your rear courtyard that's not visible to others? I'll begin by saying, Sky, I am assuming that this is an exclusive use courtyard.
That's the first question, isn't it?
Yeah. If it's an exclusive use courtyard, Sky, then you'll need to refer to your bylaws and see what is provided for there. Otherwise, Frank?
Yeah, no, I agree. It's sort of because exclusive use, as much as that attaches to your lot and is yours forevermore without any further work, it still is common property. So the bylaws can regulate what goes on in that common property. And sometimes the exclusive use bylaw might not be as specific as some other bylaw that might have, that says before you perform any works to an area external of the property, you need to seek the approval of the body corporate. So a lot of these things are, well, they have to be regulatory. They're not prohibitory. So body corporate can't prohibit it. But like all things, asking the question is always a much safer way to do it in terms of, I'd like to do this. Are you guys okay with that?
And Sky, you're going to say that the garden's not visible to other owners, which kind of answers the second observation I would have made, which is that nuisance does come into play potentially at that point, depending upon what you propose to do in that garden area. Next question that's been asked since we kicked off. Julie, thank you. If I sell my management rights business, do they need to live on site? They used to have to, didn't they, Frank?
They did from a licensing perspective, but not anymore. So the obligation to reside on site in a management rights business arises under one of two things. Well, it used to be licensing, and with the Property Occupations Act in 2014, that obligation to reside on site to hold a resident letting agent's license was removed. So provided you've got an office in a building that you manage, so you can manage multiple buildings, and provided you've got an office in one of them, you don't need to live on site from a licensing perspective. The other way an obligation to reside on site can come about is if the management rights agreement actually requires it. So as we were talking about before with Jack's question, the agreement is that contract. It says what you must do. And if it says that the nominee or the manager or director or employee or whatever it is must reside in lot 1 or a lot in the scheme, then that's what's got to happen. But that's purely then a matter of contract. Absent that, there's no statutory obligation to have a manager reside on site.
It might be a good idea and good for everybody, but that's a big difference from an obligation. Next, a question posed beforehand from Carol. Carol, thanks. Our committee rarely holds meetings, votes and issues discussed mainly via email. Apart from the secretary, who can call a committee meeting? Good question, Carol. I have the answer. Section, he says,
54 of the new module, because I also did that little bit of Googling because I wasn't sure.
It's also 54 of the old, Frank.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. Oh, actually, no, incorrect. I am wrong. So who may, if you're talking, Carol, about who can call a committee meeting, section 44, a meeting of the committee may be called by the secretary, or in the secretary's absence, the chairperson, or if both of those are absent, another member of the committee acting with the agreement of enough members to form a quorum. Shall we try that again? Member of the committee, meeting of the committee may be called by the secretary, or in the secretary's absence, the chairperson, but if neither of those are around, another member acting with the agreement of enough members to form a quorum.
So a majority of committee members can force a committee meeting if the secretary and the chairperson refuse to call it. Is the simple version?
That's right. The bigger question, if your committee isn't making decisions, that's a whole other story, Carol, and that suggests that your scheme is dysfunctional, and that may require a very, very different answer, which we won't go into just at the moment, I don't think. One of the questions posed beforehand, which I'm just now cutting and pasting and pushing up onto Facebook, it should be there any second. I have a situation where power of attorney is held by non-unit owner for a relative of the lot he resides in, but he also has power of attorney for another lot whose owner holds 2 lots. Does he then have 3 votes? That's a dilly of a pickle, isn't it? I'll try that again. I have a situation where power of attorney is held by a non-unit owner for a relative of the lot.
So there's 1 vote.
He resides in. But he also has power of attorney for another lot whose owner holds or owns 2 lots. Does he then have 3 lots or 3 votes?
Yes. Yes. So at general meeting level, it is 1 vote per lot. So this is the same thing. We covered this a little bit last week. There's a difference between a quorum, which is calculated by reference to the number of voters, because that person would only be 1 voter for the purposes of a quorum, but they've got 3 votes when they're actually voting on a particular motion at general meeting.
Let's go to one of the questions that's been posed live from Ruth. Thanks for.
Did you see the surname? I know, you saw it.
No,
my mum.
Oh, that's
my mum, everyone.
That is so cute.
I'm nearly 50 and she still watches me online.
What has to be done if an approved dog creates a nuisance? Can that approval be rescinded? Sure can. Yep.
And that wasn't actually a Dorothy Dixer either, Chris, because I think we have, we'll save that for what we're talking about next week, I think, aren't we?
He says, being all mysterious.
Yes.
But yes, yeah, certainly can. Next, Wendy. Wendy, thank you. We don't have individual water meters. If we wanted to install, I understand it's an all or none situation with a special levy, but is it a resolution without dissent? No.
I don't think so. To me, that's an improvement to common property, isn't it? So we've got I think off the cuff, again, this might be something to check out. There's the difference between maintenance and improvements in body corporates has been litigated ad nauseum. Really interestingly, repainting a building with a different colour is not maintenance, that's an improvement. And at that stage, you've got different levels of general meeting approval to actually get that done. So repainting it with the same colour, ordinary resolution, repainting it with a different colour becomes a special resolution. And I suspect the same would apply to water meters.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's a special resolution, cool. Frank, yep. without double checking. That is that.
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to post another one that we got beforehand, which is a good one. So the background to, I'll give the actual question, but the background to it is, I believe the person in question uses a wheelchair. I suppose I'm asking if the community power is an asset and the committee is the committee precluded from making a decision to effectively lease that asset without the consent of body corporate at the general meeting? So my understanding is what is wanting to happen is for somebody who has an electric wheelchair to use the common property electricity to charge the wheelchair.
And without being flippant about it, you could apply that to any number of electrical things, Teslas, fridges, freezers, the whole box and dice. And that's not being disrespectful, but the principle is someone is plugging into common power for their own personal purposes. And look, in theory, this is back to that supply agreement I was really mentioning before about the yards. Because that community power is paid for by the whole of the building and all of the owners. So if it's going to be used by people individually for their own personal purposes, they should be paying for that. But that should be under a separate supply agreement that those people have with the body corporate itself. And we've done this just recently for a retrofitted building down the Gold Coast, who is very much aware that people are going to start using Teslas, electric cars, and all those sorts of things. So we've gone and crafted the bylaw and the supply agreement for them to put in place for when they inevitably get the requests. And to me, that's no different, as brutal as that might be. And clearly, it's not going to be a substantial amount of power, but it's more about the principle of the thing, which is inevitably where a lot of these things finish.
Yep. Discrimination laws may kick in there at some point too, Frank. That's a bit of a complicated one, I will say. Kylie, thanks for tuning in and has a scenario for us. Strata manager receives a voting paper from an owner voting for an alternative motion. Owner has only circled the option A or B, but didn't circle the yes, no, abstain to vote for the motion. Do you count the vote for the A or B option chosen, or should their vote be recorded as a no altogether, given they didn't actually vote for the motion? Why are you laughing, Frank?
Oh, I'm just thinking this is all going to be cured with same issue motions on the 1st of March. But
yes.
Until then, very valid question. So I'll go out on a limb, Chris, and I'm going to suggest the vote's invalid. Because at the moment, the way it works, to participate in a motion with alternatives, you need to make a threshold decision about whether you're for or against that particular proposition. So the body corporate engage a strata advisor, yes or no, and then option B, that be Chris or that be Frank. Sound like a pirate there, don't I? If you vote no at the moment, if you vote no above the line to say, no, I don't want a strata advisor, then you don't get a choice below the line. So to me, the absence of selecting yes, no at the top means that there's no guarantee that the person didn't want to vote no in the first place. Because of course, at the top level, if there's more no's than yeses, then the whole thing's defeated and there is no alternative.
Yeah. Now, I'm almost certain this has been the subject of quite a few adjudicators' orders, but for the life of me, can't think of it on top of my head. But I'd agree with that logic, Frank, and I also agree with you that this all gets cured after the 1st of March with the new way of doing same issue motions. But for now, Kylie, I would agree with Frank. That's how it looks. Rian, thank you as always for tuning in. What is the impact when exercising an option requiring a deed of extension if the deed is not done? Does that make the contract invalid?
No. So exercising an option under a management rights agreement, usually, so every one of these is different as much as we do see a lot of the same types of clause. An option usually requires notice to be given to the body corporate, in which case the option period comes into effect. Best practice is absolutely to sign that in a deed, which then takes away any later argument in 4, 5, 10 years' time about whether that option was actually validly exercised and the body corporate acknowledged and it was within time and all those sorts of things. But a deed isn't actually required at law. It's much, much safer to do it. But in theory, the actual notice itself is enough.
Well said, Frank. Question posed a little bit earlier by Frank. Frank, is it permissible for a committee to expend within its spending limit and within the total sinking fund budget? And even though we said no multi-part questions, this is multi-part, but I'll try it anyway. 3 to 4 times on a sinking fund budget line item as a result of bringing forward expenditure scheduled for the following year, or an item for which there is no line item.
So I'm reading that to say we've got 10 grand. We've got 10 grand set aside for painting the building. It's in there, it's been raised. But for whatever reason, the committee's deciding to spend 40. That's my interpretation. So first thing is, having a line item in a budget doesn't actually mean it's the authority to spend it. That's the first rule of this Fight Club. You still need to comply with whatever the statutory requirements are around spending limits and quotes and all that sort of stuff. And the second thing I think is, if the body corporate hasn't actually raised the funds, hasn't actually raised that 30 grand, in effect, what they're doing is robbing Peter to pay Paul. Because if we're spending 40 on something, we've only got 10 in the kitty, there's 30 grand worth of expenditure being raised for something else that is no longer there. So, and as much as there might be some flexibility with that, Chris, at the moment, I suppose, under the COVID regulations, I think that potentially leaves the body corporate short 30 grand unless someone bodges up a different sinking fund forecast and takes out the 30 that was going to need to be spent and they justify it at the next year's AGM.
The only qualifier I'd put on all of that, Frank, is that it's always a case-by-case situation. And there may well be some instances where the committee can put forward a very cogent, very reasonable argument as to why they actually did that. And the adjudicator might be very happy to accept that justification. If
just and equitable for whatever reason.
Yeah, so I suppose we rarely deal in absolutes in this world, but in general, I think, yeah, what you said there, Frank, is absolutely spot on. Speaking of spot on, we're spot on for time. What a segue. That was really good, everyone. A good mix of questions, and we only got one pet question, which is really surprising.
And I didn't set that up.
Yeah, no, I believe you. I suppose the question, it's our turn to ask a question now, Frank, to finish up today. Our question for everybody watching this, either live or afterwards, or who posed a question before, is this sort of thing useful? Or is it more useful to have dedicated topic webinars? How about you let us know? Chuck us a comment on Facebook, drop us an email, send us a message. Love to hear. With that, Frank, thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Next week.
Yeah, next week, we will be talking about pets, but we will be talking about them in a very specific way. We won't reveal the exact topic just now, but
I think we should.
You want to? Okay. Next week, drum roll, Frank. Thank you. Next week, lawful pet refusals. When the committee can refuse to have a pet and be backed up in that regard. Big topic, likely to be controversial, likely to be contentious, but the bottom line is it can and it has happened. And we'll talk about how next week. For now, though, yeah.
Thank you, everyone. It was really interesting.
Yeah, and certainly kept us on our toes. Thanks, everyone. Don't forget to like and share. We'll see you next week.
Done. Bye.
Talk to you later. Bye-bye.